I don't know what we can talk about in this nation without talking about white superiority, honestly.
Who defines the meaning of God also defines the relationship between economy and God.
African Americans spent $1.3 trillion last year, making us the 16th wealthiest nation in the world. Why have we not turned those riches into wealth to develop our community?
Peace, happy family, and welcome to another exciting edition of Happy Talks. I'm your host tonight, Taki Grant. We have a very exciting and informative show this evening. We're going to be talking to Dr. Obadashaka about the origins of ancient Kemet. We say the origins that which existed in the pre-dynastic time or before that time. Something that oftentimes kind of, how would you say, intrigued me to want to know more about this period, because very little is talked about in terms of from a really, really strong historical data. We know there's certain things like the coastal incense burner, like naphtha plier, things just in the upper Nile region, the middle Nile region, borderline in Kemet and Kush, or borderline in Egypt and the Sudan today. In that region, there's a lot of history there that was unfortunately was destroyed by the creation of Lake Nasser, which was the advent of the construction of the Aswan High Dam. So a lot of that information in that region there has been kind of lost forever. Some stuff has been saved. We just mentioned the incense burner and some of the other artifacts and monuments that are still there in that region. However, there's a long standing history. We know that the ancient Kemet speak of their lineage and their line in terms of where they derived from. And it's something that has to be analyzed, in a very strong way. And I'm happy to have with us tonight Dr. Obadashaka to kind of discuss some of these things and really kind of get into, just how this civilization came to being. It's funny because I had this conversation with a colleague the other day, just talking about Sumer versus Kemet in terms of its timeline, in terms of a historical timeline, which is older, which was first. A lot of times, Eurocentric historians would like to say that Sumeria is older than ancient Kemet, but they don't take into account the roots of Nile Valley civilization and where it derived from. They just look at the times of the dynastic, so-called dynastic pyramid, the times of the pyramids, but not looking at the times that the civilization, how you develop pyramid building. Pyramid building doesn't just come up out of the ground, even though the Memphite theology says that, but we know it takes hundreds and thousands of years to get to that type of high science. And, this is some of the things we're going to talk about tonight. So, family, we had an exciting time at the Happy Day of Black Excellence. For all those who weren't there, sorry, we didn't record it. But next time, we do something, an event like that, you got to make sure you're a part of this. Make sure you sign up for the newsletter. Go to hapifilm.com and sign up for the Happy newsletter so you could be tuned in to everything that Happy is doing. As well as make sure you get your HAPI DVD or digital. I would say that you can download it or you can stream it. Also at hapifilm.com, and all your other Happy merchandise also available on the website. So with that, family, without any further ado, we're going to bring in our guest this evening. Welcome, Dr. Obadashaka.
How you, brother? How you doing, brother?
How you doing? Hotep.
What's up?
How's everything?
Good.
So we understand you have, you want to talk about this, the history of Kemet prior to it being called Kemet, prior to the development of what some people call dynastic Egypt. And, like I was saying in the introduction, is one of the things that kind of really sets up history in a very profound way. And I think this is something that we really need to talk about more, more and more. Because there's always been that debate, and I was listening to one of your lectures the other day, and or your presentations, and this cuneiform versus Medu Neter discussion. I've heard, I won't say arguments, but I've heard discussions that the cuneiform is older. But what you said, I like what you said in terms of it just being a more of an arithmetic system versus something that had phonetic value. We know the Medu Neter was actually, phonetic value system that actually conveyed, communications versus being able to tally up, goods as cuneiform, from my understanding, was doing it during that period. Um,
The problem with cuneiform is that because it's not in stone and it's perishable, uh, clay kind of thing, they don't really have evidence to back up this 3300 BC period and put dynastic Kemet at 3200. They don't have the actual records to prove that. And the main thing is, um, it's an argument to downgrade Kemet. And also, our historians are in a trap because um, in arguing over whether it's 31, 32, 33, whether or not we're 100 years older than that civilization, Mesopotamian, Sumerian, um, it's that's not the main point because number one, there's no proof that the Sumerian civilization went back that period of time. But number two, you've got a history that goes much further back. And why aren't you starting there? Since when do people start a civilization when it's full blown and call that dynastic? See, and it's not that the name Kemet starts in the first dynasty. All the elements of civilization that are called dynastic, with the exception of pyramid building, occurs in what's incorrectly called pre-dynastic. And that's incorrect because there was a unified period of Kemet during this ancient period. And in both upper and lower Kemet, there was a unification. And it took unification to create all the elements of civilization. So that was dynastic. And so how can a civilization that gives birth to Kemet and gives birth to a unified Kemet and a lot of other things, how's that pre-dynastic? So, the very naming of that. So when we get into this, I have a whole different approach in terms of how you name it and everything else. But to leave out your origins and to start when something's fully developed, who does that? And why is it that so many historians don't question that, particularly African historians? Dr. Finch has got a book coming out pretty soon, I think in a month or so, where he's going back to this. So I'll be interested to see what he has to say. But, history is the study of an origin of a thing. This is the origin of the civilization.
right.
There's an origin that precedes that. If you're going to understand who the people are that founded Kemet.
Right. I oftentimes say the way, Egyptology works is taking Kemet out of Africa and placing Egypt in the Middle East. And the way this occurs is by removing or tearing the umbilical cord or tearing the, Kemet from its root. And when you try to discuss history without no roots, you're able to kind of come up with these ambiguous places like Middle East and put, this country now called Egypt there versus in Africa and connected to its roots. So the discussion, like I said, in the Middle Nile region and in the relationship, HAPI is founded on the relationship of understanding the relationship between the kingdoms of the Nile, because it's essential to talk about we're talking about, this classical civilization, to talk about its origins. So I understand you have a presentation you would like to show.
Yeah, I thought you had a few questions you wanted to ask first. We can go
Yeah, well, I do, but we here, so we can save those questions for at the end, and we can kind of move on to the presentation and see see where it goes, which fits.
Okay. Yeah, so that point that you're making right there is again a case where someone who controls your present through colonialism and slavery and now neo-colonialism, then they go in and rewrite your past. So that's the basis for doing that. And so you have people like Hegel saying that Kemet was a part of the spirit of Asia. the spirit of Asia. Because you're going back to a period where there were no Greeks and or Europeans, especially when you go back to the ancient period of Kemet. So how can it be a part of the spirit of anything? Everything, all civilizations are born by a people. And who's going to go and say that China is a part of the spirit of Europe? Now, you could actually say that it was founded by blacks, because in fact, the same people that I'm going to trace to the origin of Kemet gave birth to China, gave birth to Japan, gave birth to the Philippines, gave birth to global civilization. So we could actually make the case. And in fact, if you look at the current president of China, she's nose, if you look at that nose, that's an African nose right there.
Mr. Xi Jinping.
Yeah. So, but there's a whole history to that one. I'm not going to go into here. So, what I wanted,
that was one of the things that when I read Destruction of Black Civilization, Chancellor Williams pointed that out about the island of Formosa, which is now Taiwan. He kind of spoke about some of those things, and that intrigued me to want to know more about African civilization. And that was one of the things for me. That was my turning point. Reading that book in the 9th grade and just seeing the migration of African people and the civilizing process that took place because of this migration was something that kind of led to what's happening now.
Yeah, Chancellor Williams is to be credited for a lot of things, and one of them is that he put his own resources into his work, mortgaged his house. His best work is Rebirth of African Civilization. Have you read that?
No, not yet.
That's his best work.
That's his best work.
That is where he went into Ghana during its independence period in the 50s. He mortgaged his house to do the research. And he asked people one question, asked thousands of Ghanaians one question. What kind of government did they want at independence? And Nkrumah had supported him on this, but unfortunately didn't take the advice that came from the people. And basically what the people said was they wanted communalism, which is the sharing of the air, the earth, and the water, nobody owning it. And they called it cooperative democracy. And they contrasted that with capitalism that they didn't want and Marxism that they didn't want. Cooperative democracy, which meant that the people shared in the use of the land, the air and the water, and through a system of consensus decision making. And so their recommendation was that their independence leaders, in this case Nkrumah, would always come to them first, consult them on the direction of the country, and then go back and do what he had to do to build the country. They were saying that they wanted societies to operate the way traditional societies did, where decisions were made at the bottom level. And I'm going to show you in a minute that the basis for Kemet, the basis of Africa, as your point is, Africa, Kemet is an expression of African civilization. Its elements are an expression of African cultural unity. And I was talking to Obenga a few months ago, and he made the point that he and Diop did not make the mistake of just centering the study of Kemet solely on Kemet, but tying it into African civilization. They knew the importance of that. And Diop did, as a Senegalese, linguistic comparisons between Senegalese language, Wolof, and Kemetic, Medu Nefer. And Obenga has done it in a lot of different ways, philosophically and culturally and anthropologically and in other ways. So you won't even appreciate some of the meaning that comes out of Kemetic civilization unless you can get its modern reflection, or at least living reflection, coming from other civilizations like the Bambara or like the Akan or like the Yoruba, or many others that are living expressions of it, because what you get in the writing sometimes isn't as clear as what you're going to get out of the oral systems that are still alive. So, yeah, so Kemet is an expression of Inner Africa. And what I wanted to do is, this is brief. People need to go to the Dr. Obatushaka show. And I have a series on the Twa, which are the world's first people that Europeans incorrectly call pygmies, an insulting term coming from the Greeks, which meant dwarf-sized people, which they're fully grown people. They're not dwarfs, they're just short. And they're the world's first people. So I'm going to go into how we need to relook at history, not just Kemet, by going to the period of its founding, not just the 32 or 3100 BC period, but its ancient period, but to understand how world history started, how world civilization started. And our historians generally, even though a few of them will address the Twa, which I'm going to do this in two parts. One, the Twa impact on the birth of humanity and the birth of civilization globally, but I'll focus on Africa, mainly Kemet. What's called pre-dynastic, but which is ancient Kemet. So one part is just looking at the Twa origin of humanity and civilization, particularly focusing on Kemet. And then the other part is looking at ancient Kemet, which I don't call pre-dynastic Kemet, and you'll see why in a minute. So one of the things I liked about Chancellor Williams is Chancellor Williams didn't just focus on Kemet, and that's another thing. John Henry Clark and I would have a lot of conversations, and John would make a comment about his friend Doc Ben, and this was not a criticism. This was just a statement of Doc Ben. He said, for Doc Ben, Kemet or Egypt is a fetish, meaning that was his sole interest when it came to Africa. And he didn't see anything wrong with that. He was using that to say that his interest, John's, was in all of Africa, and then Africa's relationship to the world. Specifically for John Henry Clark, that was the relationship of Africa to Europe, because for him, coming out of the era that he came out of, basically those were the two polarities that you focused on. So I'm not copying him. I apprenticed under him, but I was a mature scholar when I started apprenticing under him. And we shared a lot of things, and I learned things from him. But so my approach is to, one, look at the roots of things, going back to their beginning. So that's my first concern with any area of history or anything else, going to the root. And then I'm not interested in doing what people have already done. If the research's good, I'll draw on it. If I've got anything to add, I'll add to it. But I'm not going to reinvent the wheel, you know? So our scholars and a lot of others have done a lot of work on dynastic Kemet. A lot we know and a lot we don't know, but we know a lot. So partially my concern is getting to the root. Now, part of it is I'm a revolutionary. Among the African-centered scholars, I'm the only one. So what do revolutionaries do? Revolutionaries draw on history, particularly African revolutionaries should, too many of them don't, but should, draw on the best of your past to reconfigure it, to use it to change oppressive societies that we live in. So in this particular case, Africa, and in this particular case, Africans in America or Africans in the Caribbean or wherever we are in the world. So I'm a systems person, and I come up with models that come out of ancient African history preceding the coming of Islam and Christianity that provide just society models. And I'm going to address one or two of them that also impact on Kemet, but the rest of Africa, but serve as a key for taking a society that is really crooked and making it straight. And I think it's really the key for creating just societies in Africa. So for me, this isn't an excursion into the past just to be able to say, we're great. I'm a warrior. I come out of struggles. And I pretty well threw away European methodology. So the methods I use, they're not the ones the Europeans use, you know. And I'll go some places that was going to scare some Afrocentric people, because that's what revolutionaries like to do. We like to shake people up. If what we're pursuing is right, you know what I mean? I don't care if it's black or white, you know. So go ahead.
I'm sorry, Dr. Obadiah. You know, as you were speaking about that, this ties into something I did want to ask you about. So when I think of, you know, being a strategist, you know, being a warrior and a strategist, and just looking at the past, particularly, you know, from our strategic advantages and maybe where things may have shifted for us, you know, when, you know, it was once upon a time like this and where we are now, because people oftentimes ask that question. If we were here, how did we get here? You know, like what happened? And it's oftentimes wondered, and the question always comes up, were Africans or are Africans too passive? And was that the cause, from a strategic standpoint, that caused us to go from here to there? What are your thoughts on that?
Well, first of all, yeah, I'll address that. But if you're a strategist and you're a revolutionary, you're going to be asking a bigger question. And the bigger question is, what is it that you can take out of your past to transform a society that is driving people nuts, blowing them away, as we've just seen in Memphis, or got people homeless, or got people hungry, or just got people in a traumatic state? What is it that you draw from your past to do that, you know, to change that? And one of the first things I would say is you are your past. That's true. History is a clock and so forth. But you are your past. And our past goes back to almost 200,000 years. So we have a very short interval of oppression, a number of 100 years. And we treat that like that's the sole reality. And then what we do is we even define ourselves that way. Afrocentric people don't, but ex-slaves and stuff like that. So that's the more important question. Now, in terms of what happened, it's pretty clear. The Gatling gun and gunpowder, I mean, that's basically it. And being able to take people on, take armies on at a long distance, when even though our ironsmiths were making guns, they didn't have factories and they didn't have the distance when it came to shooting a gun. They didn't have the propulsion. But so it was the technique. And that's basically the thing. I have a couple of shows where I deal with the decline of America. And one of the main reasons for the decline of the West. Why? Because there was a monopoly of techniques of gunpowder and of naval power and various kinds of industrial power in the hands of whites. And now the techniques are in everybody's hands. And once blacks and people of color got the techniques of gunpowder, well, that led to America getting whipped in North Korea, Vietnam, Iraq, Afghanistan. And in fact, I mean, the victories that America's had have been so small that it's very hard to call them victories. If you want to call overthrowing the government in Grenada, you know, or Panama, if you want to call those victories. So the key point is that, yeah, so techniques were in their hands, but with the Russo-Japanese War, the turn of the century, where in a few minutes, the Japanese wiped out the Russian Navy in a few minutes, that was telling you history was changing. And now you're seeing the rise of China. And once because China was not fully colonized, so they could get their act together quicker. We face slavery and colonialism, so it's going to take us longer to pull the pieces back together. But once we do, you're going to see these same techniques along with other things that we have and will develop, and which the African America has to a higher level when it comes to techniques and technology and higher levels of education. We've got that more than any other African group in the world. Some of us brainwashed, some of us not, but that can be utilized in Africa, and Africa is getting it as well. So that's the reality. America's in decline. Do we see it? And a world of colors on the rise. So that's the reality in which you should be viewing history. And your demographics, whites are going to be a minority in this country in 40 years or less, but by 2045, so a couple of 20, 25 years. And that is part of why Trump, was able to get in office. A lot of reasons, but the big fear of the power shift. So, and so again, we're into the negative. So we'll say, yeah, but they'll control everything. Really? Have you read history? What goes up comes down, and you're in a position to affect that change. So that's how I view history. You know what I mean? And all people face rises and falls. That is the nature of history. Just like you live and you die. And of course, spiritually, you're reborn. And you can come back to a new life. And some civilizations come back again. But the fact of the matter is, that's the pattern of history. We treat it like permanent tragedy. You know what I mean? These
Right.
boys are going down.
You know what I think of, the America falling or the West ceasing. One of the things, I wouldn't say concerning, but one of the things I think of is the so-called honorary whites. These other groups that a lot of times, because they want to see that table so badly, their oppression towards Africans and blacks are sometimes much worse than what Europeans do. And black people,
which groups are you referring
well, Asians, certain Asian groups, Chinese, Indians, when it comes to being racist, think of people like, who were colonized. So the British were very good at making them honorary whites. And these groups have this there isn't a lot of love for Africans, in some of these groups. And when I think about that, think about what we have to be in a better position. If this thing falls apart tomorrow, we have to start getting our act together so that we can be in a position that we can then take power. Because
there are a couple of key things in that. Number one, because this isn't just theorizing, this has happened, and then it's a question of how it will happen. Number one, we occupy a powerful position in this country. Blacks do. It's a strategic position. And it's based on the fact that we're located inside the belly of this place, number one. And so, as Malcolm X said, when we move, we can mess up the furniture. That's number one. That's a strategic position. And number two, it's based on the strength of our culture, which is the culture of popular choice in the United States and the world. And so this is another side of this that we need to be aware of. We need to know Africa, and we need to know the cultures of Africa that we come from, of which there's a common cultural unity, and then there are some unique features for each one. But we also need to know this culture that we've forged in this country, that is the culture of popular choice. It is the most complex culture in this country. And it is the reason why our strategic location and our culture, it is why when we move, we create chain reactions. See, I'm speaking from experience because I've led movements where we've done that. I led the San Francisco Freedom Movement, the only successful Black Power, Black Freedom movement in the North from the 60s to now. We defeated an entire economic power structure, did a whole lot of stuff. One of the things we did, we radicalized white youth. And when we took on the last 3 major employers that we took on, we recruited students from UC Berkeley and San Francisco State. And what happened as a result of that movement is, after throwing them in jail for a year for jobs for Blacks, we radicalized them, and it led them to then stand up, and they say so, start a free speech movement in the most strategic university in the United States that produces more Nobel laureates than all the Ivy League universities put together. You understand? And at San Francisco State, it then gave birth to the Experimental College, which is the mother or the embryo for Black studies. Some students that were in jail at that same time at what's called the Sheraton Palace Hotel demonstration. Or if you look at the Black Panther Party, when they started moving, they inspired the Brown Berets, Mexicans. They inspired Puerto Ricans. And because I've done a series on the Dr. Obachashaka show on the Black Panther Party, had a beautiful brother's minister of culture of the Black Panther Party, Emory Douglas, the artist. He made the point that, if we can influence this group, then it means we got some real power. You hear me? The American Indian movement was inspired by the Black Panther Party. You understand?
No, that was interesting.
Hold it. And then at the same time, a little yellow man named Ho Chi Minh, who was going to a Marcus Garvey meeting in the early 20s, working on a steamship line for the French, when Stokely Carmichael, who's a good friend of mine, later Kwame Ture, is in North Vietnam to show support for the Vietnamese people against America's unjust war in Vietnam, Ho Chi Minh said it was Marcus Garvey who inspired me to go back to Vietnam to lead a movement for liberation in Vietnam. What's your Black ass doing in Vietnam? You should be in Africa. So my point is, we have certain kinds of power, and when we're conscious of it and move it, then that power can produce change. You saw it with Black Lives Matter, that in effect, that movement, along with the bungling by Trump of COVID-19, put him out of the White House. But I don't see Black people celebrating that, because we tend to have a myopic view of this and forever talking about what's wrong, and there's a lot wrong that we have to correct, but not realizing the power that we have. We put him out of the White House, set him up to go to the jailhouse. We'll see if he goes. But the key point is, you are on the verge of some real fascism. You hear me? That was a major move. And that was some serious organizing done by, Black Lives Matter networks and stuff like that, who were drawing from history, which I'm going to show you in a minute, goes all the way back to these first people, the Twa. You going to say something?
Yeah. So
oh, hold on. This is actually a good introduction to what I'm going to get into, because I can apply it even better. So go ahead.
Okay. So, I think this, looking back at the 60s, it was such an innovative time and so much occurred there. And, oftentimes we look at the struggle of now and then, and it's like, what are we doing wrong now versus what happened then? And one of the things that come up oftentimes when those questions is asked is that, this enemy we have is figured out certain things and kind of change certain strategies.
For example.
Well, I think a lot of a lot of it more so seems like it's more covert now in terms of what they do and how they go about doing things. Said oftentimes, like, drugs was one of the things, the heroin flood in the communities is one of the things that kind of helped destroy the Black Power movement. And now we have this thing, culturally, they use our culture against this, music, particularly hip hop. Hip hop is considered now like the crack of today. It does more damage. It's been doing more damage than crack did in the 80s. And it's interesting to see how, they've taken something that we created, flipped it, and used it against us, And also, I think one last point. One of the things that they saw the unity of these different peoples of color coming together. And I think that scared, excuse my language, that scared the shit out of them. And there seemed to be more division now in these groups, between these groups in terms of like trying to find out a common cause and really kind of coming together. We kind of figured some things out. We kind of figured out, we shouldn't be fighting with each other. But it seems like now, particularly like LA would be like a classic example. There's a lot of violence in between the races, not particularly, the white and the Black, but it's more so the battlefield, it seems like, is the brown and the Black. And I just want you to know if you can kind of just elaborate on that.
Yeah, well, what we did in the 60s is we defeated Southern apartheid, and that was a big defeat. And that was because the Southern movement, King, CORE, which I was a part of, Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, had come up with a methodology that worked. In case of San Francisco, we did as well. Most of the other movements did in part, but not wholesale. We came up with methodologies that worked and, did a whole lot of stuff. Now, here's a key point. What do you expect your enemy to do when you do that? They're going to come back and hit you. And so that's what happened. I faced 3 assassination attempts. This finger right here, 18 guys put on me, One was low intensity operations. I'm not here by accident because I got on my knees and prayed and God just let me live. You know what I mean? So we got hit. But we got hit in part, it was an attack against us, against the movement. In part, it was a part of globalization that the corporations had decided to move on that had nothing to do with us. You need to read this book, Integration Trap, Generation Gap, Caused by a Choice Between Two Cultures, to explain that. And so what you're talking about, drug CIA, put it in your community. They had trains coming in loaded with guns, in major Black communities, brought in by the intelligence agencies, and they busted up communities, a whole bunch of stuff that happened. So I have a very precise analysis on that, and that's one I'm not going to go into now, but there are things that happen as a result of those forces hitting us that have put us in disarray. I'll give you the overall answer, and this comes from the spirit realm. I won't go into all this detail now, but the forces that hit us put our people in a position where, for the first time, these aren't my words, these come from a higher source, where our people were put in the position of choosing between two cultures. That's never happened before. We think it did in slavery. No, it didn't. We recreated culture in slavery. But we now have some people who have stepped out of culture. And it's unconscious choices. It's not conscious. We have some behavior in the Black community we've never seen before. We didn't have serial killers before. Disrespect of elders. Some people who get a joy out of violence just for its own sake. Or some people who are so hopeless that they're committing suicide from the age of 7 to 11, which we have the lowest suicide rates in this country, except for 7 to 11-year-olds. You understand? So these are cultural shifts. But then again, you got to look at the whole thing. See, Afrocentric people need to also be engaged in struggle. They need to be involved in something in their community where they're fighting the power that is moving on us. And so what's happened is a lot of the youth also learn lessons from this. And when I say youth, they're younger than me. Some of them in their 40s, some in their 50s, some in their 30s, some in their 20s. They learned a lesson, a lot of lessons. But the big lesson was that we had to shift our leadership style. And so one of the reasons why a Trump could be knocked out of office is because because of the fragmentation in Black communities for a whole lot of reasons, but because some of the younger people had read Ella Baker, had read SNCC, some of them have read my books, The Art of Leadership, have read Malcolm, have read these different things, but especially Ella Baker, because they understood that these singular leader things ain't going to work no more. And they come up with a thing called group-centered leadership. And that's what's really driving what most of what's going on now. And if you're looking at the ground level, there's interaction between Black, white, brown, red, and yellow, youth especially. And that's what put Trump out of office. So we need to be careful that we're not avoiding analyzing what's going on right under our nose. Now, these movements are sporadic. Why? Because they depend upon the anger of the people, specifically around police violence, and that's what drove a lot of these movements, which was also true in the mid-60s, Black Panther Party, but especially urban rebellions. Every one of them was triggered by police violence. So the point is, the youth have become a lot more sophisticated. And you got to look at both. See, Malcolm talked about dynamite. He said, there's a stick of dynamite and there's the fuse. He said, the fuse is the smallest part, but when you light it, everything else explodes. You got to look at the smallest part. And that smallest part is organizing all over the country. And it's sisters who are carrying the biggest weight on that. You know what I mean? Because of the breakdown of the social structure of the Black community, sisters are playing a bigger role in struggle because of that. And they're the first ones to coin this term, Black Lives Matter, over their concern about the death of their own brothers. You know what I mean? So,
let me just one quick question. Was that a part of the? Sorry, go ahead.
What I want to do is get into what I want to talk about, because I think this is a good introduction to that. Because what we need to do is have some shows on this one. You know what I mean? But it ain't as bleak as it looks. I mean, look at the fact that right now the president of the United States is in office because of the organizing that Blacks have done, and particularly in places where you expected it to work least, like Georgia. Georgia. And so, again, we can put this down, but without that, you're in another position. So that's power. And it's young people who have particularly appreciated this, and then some of the elders who are working with them. But what I wanted to do was use that to get into the theme of this. I'm just going to hit a few high points, and then, we can summarize this thing. So the point is that, so now, we see Blacks seeing the need for us to address some key issues that are facing us. The issue that's being addressed right now is police violence, and one of the ways it's being addressed is through various networks coming together, using the internet, using networking with groups and everything else. That really confuses the intelligence agencies and everything else, because they don't know where all this stuff is coming from. But the key point is, this has a root in your history. The fact that they're drawing from Ella Baker. Ella Baker, I don't know if she knew it, but she was the chief inspiration behind the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. No Ella Baker, no SNCC, and her emphasis on group-centered leadership was particularly important. Now, I must make the point that Black Lives Matter, for example, in those groupings, because it's not just them, they're not just drawing from the book of Ella Baker. They're drawing from that Southern playbook of the mass march and the mass movement, something that we didn't use in the San Francisco freedom movement, because it wouldn't have worked on the stuff we were doing, going up against the economic forces. But it has been good for publicizing brutal violence, So let's go to the roots of this, because a lot of our behavior is also drawing from a past, a deep past. And so part of that past has got to do with the people who have been rubbed out of history. That's the TWA, TWA, people who are also, incorrectly called so-called pygmies. And they are the world's first people. And so what's happened, you know, when we deal with history, we'll focus on Kemet, or we'll focus on the West African civilizations, usually the best known, Ghana, Mali, Songhai, or we'll go into others, but we leave out the foundation. So how is it you build a house and you know, the thing you pay least attention to is the foundation. Now, if you do that, you know what's going to happen with the house. It isn't going to take too much earth movement for that house to come down. I live in a place here in Oakland where some of these houses are on hills. A brother was a contractor, and his house is straight up on a hill. The city made him have a 16-foot foundation. He didn't like it. But if he was around now, because he sold that house would have probably slipped down the hill with mudslides, you know? And I was thinking to myself, you're a builder and you're complaining about this? The house I live in has a 16-foot foundation, and I'm on a flat level. You know, I'm on a knoll, but I'm on a flat level because the guy that built my house was a master builder. So he knew the foundation is essential. So if you're going to understand your history, if you don't know the foundation, you in a world of trouble. You hear me? And so what I'm presenting here is a new school of history, which, by the way, again, this book, The Integration Trap, Generation Gap, provides a summation for. And this book, Return to the African Mother Principle of Male and Female Equality, provides the paradigm for, the model for. And I'm going to show you that these models that you come up with, they're the real key for changing everything. So,
and just real quick, Dr. Obadashaka, where can they get your books from?
You can go to the Dr. Obadashaka show, and then you'll see, just as you have this screen, you know, below your screen telling you how to donate, you'll see where you can click in and go to Gumroad, and you can buy the books off of Gumroad. We publish our own books and distribute them. So we'll send them to you. So don't be going to Amazon. My book, The Mother Principle, in some places selling for $1,000 on Amazon. It costs $24.95 from me with a signature. You know what I mean?
Wow.
That they could get away with selling that, but that is a ripoff. You know what I mean? Yeah. A pure ripoff. So,
hey, family, make sure you go to Dr. Obadashaka and support the elder, and make sure you get his books directly from him with a signature, and don't go giving your money to Amazon.
Yeah, exactly. So the Twa are at the foundation of not only African history, but of world history. According to mitochondrial DNA, which is the DNA emitted by the mother, which is permanent, according to mitochondrial DNA, the first human beings were the Kung people, K-U-N-G, or San people, the same people, from the Kalahari Desert in South Africa. And mitochondrial DNA traces them back to 144,000 years, give or take 10,000 years, because mitochondrial DNA has a 10,000 year error rate. I like mitochondrial DNA more than any other piece of evidence. If you have that, that's the best stuff. Hominids and stuff, bone fragments is fine, but this is the best stuff. So along with some other ways that you pipe in and get the real truth, because most of us are Western trained, so we're just going to the facts and the bones that we can dig up. There's actually some higher things that you can get into, which I've been fortunate enough to get into. I won't go into here, but I will say that the proof of the pie is in the pudding. And what I put out, it works, baby. It works. So that's the real test here. And I'm going to give you one that is going to really show you just how well it works. Because I'm a see, touch, and smell person, but I'm into the spirit realm. There was a time where I wasn't. And so everything to me was the reality of the situation, what you can see. Now, I'm a spirit man. I'm a spiritual scholar warrior. I'm really not spiritual. There's no such word in any African language. It's spirit. And that's where you pipe into that. We like to intellectualize it and feel comfortable. As soon as you start talking spirit, some of our people rear back, and particularly our PhDs, because they've been despiritualized, some of them. You know what I mean? With this Western miseducation. Even though they got the facts right, they ain't got the perspective right. So the thing is that the Twa are the world's first people. And they, in leaving them out of the narrative of history, then you're not going to know its foundation and the contributions that they make to global civilizations. And in fact, I would say that it is key to the DNA of African people. It is key to the cellular memory of African people, because there's such a thing as cellular memory. People who go to the spirit realm see it. And it's all a part of your makeup. And basically, when you see the behavior pattern of Africans who underwent enslavement or colonialism, one of the most important traits that you'll see coming from the Twa and then other African civilizations that follow is this beautiful trait of humanism. This is a key quality. You saw it with George Floyd, with the dignity, this big old black man up here, dignified, trying to get something because he didn't have the power to stop this. But what you saw was that. And what you see with black folks who didn't have 40 acres and a mule, what is it that enabled us to survive? Caring for each other. Humanism, you know, that's been at the core of our culture. And of course, spirituality, you know, the spirituality. So the Twa make certain key contributions to humanity, to civilization. First, they're the world's first people. And they established their presence all over the world. I'm not going into that. If you go look at my series, I show their presence all over the world, in Europe, in Asia, among Native Americans in the South Pacific, all over the world. So they're the world's first people. They are the authors of the notion of one God. Black people are basically spirit bound. Some people will say we have religiosity. You know what I mean? It's not God, it's God. You know what I mean? That's important for Black people. You hear me? And it also carries us through. But the fact of the matter is, they are the authors of this notion of one God. But it is not a killer God. It is not a monotheistic dictatorial God. It is not a God that leads to war. And it is definitely not a physical God, because their conception of God is perfectly consistent with quantum physics and astrophysics, because they say God is the totality of forces, a part of which God instills in everything that God creates. That's basically physics, that everything is composed of energy. You hear me? And it's intelligent energy. And so wave and particles in quantum physics, that's a God force there. You hear me? And so in Kemet, when you look at the noon, while Ptah comes out of the noon, so the noon is the first force, but it's energy. It's electromagnetic energy. That's physics. The very notion of the origin of things coming out of the watery mass, which the Kemites capture the fact that the Nile was key, that 75% of a human being is water, that 75% of the earth is water, you know what I mean? But the key point is it's the energy in the water, and that's a God force, you hear me? So this isn't religion. They didn't give birth to religion. It's a spirit system, baby. The conception of God, therefore, is found all over Africa. The same conception that comes from the Twa, the Bambara, they describe God as infinite force outside of space and outside of time. Now, that's a good definition for astrophysics, because that is God at the point of the Big Bang. You hear me? At the point of time, you know? He's out, but God is outside of space and outside of time. And so God is the source also for time. So Africans don't have a problem with both the Big Bang and what's called singularity, which is the time before happening happened. We like to go back to origin. it starts with the Chua. And by the way, the Chua are the authors of astrophysics. And this is one example of Chua work in Nokta Playa, not far from Giza. This is a book called The Origin Map. Have you read this?
No,
Yeah.
not yet.
This is astrophysicists who work at the space station here in the US. And what you're seeing here, let's see if I get this up. Yeah, right up here.
Mhm.
16,500 BC. These are megaliths, stone megaliths that trace the pattern of Orion and its orbit, 16,500 BC. Now I'm going to talk about 10,000 BC, which is what most historians trace to be the origin of ancient Kemet. But these Chua, who were the first people called Anu, which we'll get into in a minute, meaning great ones, they were the first people to migrate into this area called the Nile Valley and give birth to the civilization. So the same people who give birth to humanity and give birth to global civilization also founded Kemet. So we're going to go into that one in a minute. The Chua conception of God is also based on another conception, which is consistent with the Chua notion of their humanity. The Chua call themselves pure people. Pure people. All of them. We're going to see how this traces into ancient Kemet in a minute. But all of them call themselves pure people. What does that mean? They're the first people to come from heaven to earth. They are a people whose conception of God is free of any fault. All the major religions, if you look at the description of God, it's a jealous God, it's an arbitrary God, it's a God that wants no other gods before it, as if there could be, you know. But the Chua conception of God, which is based on their own contact with the God force, is God is all good. How could they have that conception? Because they were close to that themselves. People's conception of God is really a conception of themselves. They can't see God any further than they see themselves. And of course, with the white thing, God's got to be white. And to counter it for black people, God's got to be black. But God ain't no human being. God's a force, baby. If God concentrated in one human being, that would just be an impossibility, because God is in everything, and without it, there's nothing. You know what I mean? So this notion of pure people is coming from a people who give birth to a society that is very just. They give birth to the most just society on the planet Earth in the history of human history. And so why would we neglect studying their contribution when they have the longest period of any society on Earth, at least 130,000 years, because they're hunter-gatherers. And we tend to dismiss that because we're into Rolls Royces, Cadillacs, Mercedes-Benz, we like our electricity, and we like skyscrapers. And when we go to Africa, we want to go to the places that see that. And of course, we like to see the monumental architecture that Africans built. But talk hunter-gatherer, oh man, you must be kidding. Bush, you crazy? You know what I mean? Well, in fact, these first people who were hunter-gatherers lived in the most just societies on the planet, where there was no abuse of women, children, elders, or men, where there were no jails, there were no rich and poor, and there was no slavery. And that went on for a good 130,000 years. Now, as one student of Twa Society, a guy named Gerhard Krauss, noted. He said that the Twa hunter-gatherer societies were I'm quoting him, the original affluent society where all the people's needs were easily satisfied. In other words, hunter-gatherers didn't do hardly any work. I remember sitting on a bus stop, sitting waiting for a bus in the Fillmore. This was in the 70s. And an old brother was sharing his wisdom with me. And what was his wisdom? He said, guess what? You'll never get wealthy working. I said, yeah, that's a damn truth. Because, yeah, there are some people who are millionaires and billionaires who you say work. But, hey, the people who do the work that make them millionaires and billionaires, they're the ones that do the work. And in the end, these fat cats, they ain't doing nothing, So I got the point. Well, these people lived in a society where they had the things they needed, because hunting might take a little while. You might shoot with a bow and arrow. You might shoot you an antelope, and you might not. But the sister would always bring in some wild eatables. You hear me? And then the rest of the time was leisure. I've done a lot of research on these Twa. They could have transitioned to agriculture long ago. They chose not to, because they understood working with crops is not slavery, but it can be hard work. And why do it when you can get all the nutritional things in the wild? And then they knew how to make fire, how to cook meat. They knew all the goodies. You know what I mean? So this is the nature of that. But here's the key point. I'm the only scholar in the world that has figured out what was the basis for this just society. And I didn't figure it out. It came from God. And when I say this, a lot of people, my wife warned me. She said, oh, people are going to think you're crazy when you say it. I don't care. All breakthroughs that are innovations come from the intuitive realm. You have to know the fundamentals. But if that's all you know, you'll be average. So Einstein knew the fundamentals of quantum physics. He was an average physicist. But he had a dream. He saw himself in a sleigh going down at the speed of light, looking at the stars. That was half of the theory of relativity. And then while talking to other physicists, he had another intuitive breakthrough. That was the theory of relativity. And so what did he get from that? He got from that a truth that was already there, but no one had ever discovered. That's what real innovation is. It's discovering laws that God put out there that have been there forever, but had not.
I have a quick question.
Before. Yeah.
Just a really, really quick question. And it's a terminology I only heard you say. And it's connected to what we're talking about right now. And that's piping in. Like, where did that terminology come from? When you speak of like piping in to the God consciousness.
It comes from anyone that's done real innovation. When I say real innovation, they have discovered a truth in the cosmos that was always there. So George Washington Carver called it thinking God's thoughts. He's the greatest scientist in the 20th century. Why? Well, he had gifts. I mean, he was 10 years old. He was taking in wounded animals and plants that needed to be healed. And he said nothing from nature that he ever cared for ever died. He had a gift. Then he was privileged to go to the best agricultural school in the United States. So he got a little physics and chemistry together. But his gift was already there. But the key point is his innovations in botany and in many other areas came from what he called thinking God's thoughts. How? Through dreams. See, we put all this stuff down. But see, for the average person, a dream can save you. I was reading a thing in the slave narratives. It was really after slavery, where a family, was just, living in the South and facing Ku Klux Klan violence right after the end of slavery. And the husband has a dream. The Klan's going to come and shoot the house up. He brings all his friends together. They're armed and they shoot at the Klan. The Klan never bothered him again. The wife said, if it wasn't for that dream, we'd be dead. So we have been despiritualized to fear this stuff. But if you look at, for example, there's a thing called the periodic table in chemistry. That was discovered through a dream, but the guy had to know chemistry. But a lot of people knew chemistry, but they couldn't get the periodic table. Why not? Because the logical mind sees in sequences. The logical mind is a servant mind. But if that's all you're operating on, by the way, the book I'm finishing now on Seba, which is right now it's entitled Seba, to know the truth is to be the truth. It's a replacement system for teaching, for pedagogy. And I'm showing that the main reason why we're miseducated isn't just because we have misinformation. It's because the method we have has got us messed up. It's a despiritualized method. And so it only produces people who are good at quoting what they already got. They aren't able to originate too much of anything. And that's why the PhD was put down, out for people to get. I didn't get one until I was 52. I was already tenured. I didn't need it. And I went into a program where I could actually use it because it was around the people are the source of knowledge. But the PhD, what is a PhD? Knowing a lot about very little. And so you can run around and just talk about that. And I'm critical of Afrocentric people who know ancient Africa, but don't know how to apply it to their reality today and how to use it as a liberatory, tool. You know what I mean? So the key point is then with the Twa, when we're looking at the Twa, or in my case, when I'm looking at them, I pipe into God's mind. By the way, George, John Coltrane, where does droning sound come from? A dream. You understand? See, the average person who gets this, that helps them in their lives. But when you're piping into something where you care about more than yourself, then sometimes you can pipe into this innovative realm. And that's why George Washington Carver was the best scientist of the 20th century. Einstein said he was the second best. Everybody else said he was the best. Why? Einstein had one breakthrough, a big one, theory of relativity. George Washington Carver had so many, you can't count them. And none of them were used to harm humanity. Not one of them. You hear me? And so he understood botany and other areas of science, but his ability to create, because he would go into his laboratory at 4 a.m. and do what he called creative science, thinking God's thoughts, and things would come to him. He would see all kinds of breakthroughs because he was basically out there to help poor Black people. He was given a blank check by Henry Ford for any amount. And he said, if I did that, my race wouldn't get credit for this. But he didn't care about money. He cared about the people. God gave him access to more of God's mind than any other scientist. That's why you can't touch him. It'll be hard for somebody to touch him in the in this century. It'll be hard, But in Africa, this is common. You have scientists who do this. So in my case, I won't go through the process. I'll simply say that my experience, it came from a beautiful light. God is, by the way, a white light. That source that we're talking about, higher spirit powers than me, because I'm no high spirit power. A great holy man called Fool's Crow. He's one of the greatest holy men among the Lakota people, was an advisor to the American Indian movement, lived to 99 years of age. He would actually go, because there's a thing called astral projection. See, a lot of this stuff is spooky for a lot of people, because particularly the brothers, but even some brothers have this and then don't want to admit it. But that's when your spirit leaves your body. It goes to the future, goes to the past. My first wife would have this astral projection. One time she had one where she saw me meeting the president of Tanzania 10 years before it happened, described in detail what would happen. 10 years later, I met the president of Tanzania. And she said, he's going to want your briefcase. I have this beautiful hand-tooled Mexican briefcase that I wouldn't like to give up. So I knew, okay, he might want the briefcase. I got to give it up because in Africa, that's what happened. But I said, more likely it means something else. What it meant was, when I met with this president, I had more agreement with him than I've had with anybody. 3-hour meeting, you know what I mean? He wanted what I had in the briefcase, the ideas. You know what I mean? So in piping into God's mind, this beautiful light, which I've seen a couple of times, that choice between two cultures is the answer for both the problem blacks face and the solution. You hear me? That came from God. Those words are not mine. What I'm going to give you right now, these are not my words. So when I'm asking God, what's the basis of just societies? I've been in battles for 30 years. I'd gone through retreats. I've explained this before, where I 3 months, a year for 5 years, looking at myself, polishing my mirror. In spiritual talk, that means getting your stuff, you know, yourself more balanced, cleaning up your mirror. George Washington Carver had a pure mirror. I'm just trying to get mine so it's not too foggy, you know what I mean, around issues that I had. So when I'm asking, what's the basis for the just societies of Africa? This is what I get as the answer. And this, by the way, is the key for us reconfiguring this crooked as a pretzel place called the United States of America, or straightening Africa out, or wherever we are in the world. This is the formula, and this is the formula that worked for 130,000 years among these people. And no historian got this before, and I wouldn't have got it because it's so simple, I would have missed it. And so what did I hear? Telepathically, because I don't hear any speech when I have this piping into God's mind. What did I hear? It said the just society, because I asked what were the just societies of Africa, and this is what comes from the light. And some of you are going to say, oh, you didn't get no light. Well, here's the deal. You don't have to believe this. But why am I going to lie? Because if I'm smart enough to get this, I'm going to tell you I got it. But the key point is the proof of the pie is in the pudding. Does this baby work? Does it describe what's actually going on? So what the light said without speaking was the just societies of Africa were those where all the males and females were equally empowered to govern every phase of society. I knew instantly that was the Twa. I had not figured out the basis for the just societies. Neither have any of the other people that have studied this. And in fact, what they see in Twa behavior is random. They don't even understand the patterns that are going on when they're making decisions, for example, which is consensus-based, where all the males and females are equally empowered to govern every phase of society. On the one hand, this means that the Twa gave birth to democracy. Now, that term democracy is Greek, but the Greeks barely practiced it. It was 25,000 people in Athens for a short period of time under the Solon reforms and others, you know what I mean? The African having a say-so in what we do is as natural as breathing. And this comes from a Twa basis. If you're looking at jazz, what is that? An aristocracy of democracy of counts and dukes and ladies who, when they have got their musical chops together, get out there and democratically improvise. You hear me? On what's called the spur of the moment. That is as natural to us as breathing. And so most historians agree that African democracy is consensus-based. It comes from this formula. It comes from the fact that just societies are based on the fact the male has no more power than the female has no more power than the male. And they both have an equal say-so in the societies in which they run. Theophil Obenga, when he's talking about Kemet, he gets real passionate on this. It's based on male-female equality. Now, the Kemites weren't as balanced as the Twa because women were highly respected. As Diop said, no systematic mistreatment of women in Kemet. But particularly when you get to the dynastic period of pharaohs, you know, it's not all the males and females being equally empowered, but there is male-female empowerment, and women have a say-so. And I'll go into that briefly when I go into this period of ancient Kemet, as well as you can see it in Kemet itself. And this is a feature that you find all over Africa later. when Ibn Battuta, who is a Arab historian, is traveling in Mali, and these are Muslims, in these cases African Muslims, he makes the point that African women occupied a higher position in the society than the men, so much so that the woman could have a boyfriend. See, under polygamy, the man gets to have him more than one wife. But because Mali was a society based on male-female balance, inclining towards the female, when he comes into the house of a beautiful African woman and a very powerful African man who's her husband, she's entertaining her lover. All the males and females are equally empowered to govern every phase of society. You like that one, brother? Most of them say, yeah, I can have one, but you can't. But the sister, because these early societies tended to incline, when they move out of hunter-gatherer, they incline, they're balanced, male and female, but incline often more to the female and for the good of the society. So this was the key to the just societies of Africa that follow, the just societies of Native Americans, and it's the key to the ancient system of Kemet that comes later. So this applies when you say all the males and females are equally empowered to govern every phase of society. That's a totality. You're not just describing one thing. So it's a form of family organization. So I formulated a name for this. Obenga said this should be in the dictionary. And Obenga thinks that the return to the African mother principle of male and female equality, many other scholars do as well, is a classic. And he said the term that I've used to define African families should be in the dictionary. That was Obenga. So what was that term? Male and female balance. So I've concluded that African family systems were not matriarchal. There may have been a few. The Bono Kingdom in Ghana, for example, women ruled, but very few. And there were very few ruled by men. I know of none. But I'm going to allow for the fact that there may have been one or two. Exceptions always prove the rule. And that matriarchy, patriarchy, that's rule over, These are societies of balance. So rule over isn't what's going to be happening there, And matrilineal, patrilineal, so your last name comes from your mother's line of the family, matrilineal, or patrilineal, the last name of your family comes from your father's line. I've come up with a new term, twinlineal, which reflects this is what happens when God gives you something and you're able to see something people haven't seen before. So I named it. But you see, it ain't all that creative because God gave me the formula. You know what I mean? So I put a name on it, twinlineal. What does that mean? So your lineage, what are you descended from? You're not descended from father alone and mother alone, mother and father, not grandfather alone, grandmother alone, but grandmother, grandfather, And if God is he, God is she. God ain't either one of those. But if you want to trade it one way, it's the other way. You know what I mean? And I analyze in this book 14 ancient African families that come after the Twa to show that is the family formation, not matriarchy, as Sheikh Anta Diop said. No, that's wrong. I showed he was wrong on his Southern Cradle theory. Absolutely wrong. That Africa is the twin lineal zone. And that interplay between male and female has been the secret to us getting our act together. And it is the key to us rebuilding Black families today, rebuilding Black communities. And by the way, it's the key to restructuring this society, this paradigm here. You hear me? So the key point is the Twa give birth to this, and they give birth to much more. Now, and by the way, they innovate a whole lot of things. So people just think, oh, it's just society. Yeah, these are quaint people. No, they give birth to medicine. They give birth to astrophysics. They give birth to physics. They give birth to a whole lot of stuff I'm not going into right now. Because as a pure people, if George Washington Carver, who wasn't as pure in his character as these Twa, but he was a hell of a good human being. That goodness is what opens you up. Most of us who get it, we're not in that realm, that zone, of continuous goodness. We're human beings, but some of them are extraordinary human beings. And so they're able to pipe in to higher mind stuff. So these Twa, they're the innovators of civilization because they got a higher mind, baby. And they can do all kinds of stuff. And that's what they did when they decided, as a Twa legend said, we created a civilization called Kimi, K-I-M-Y. They said, we sailed ships along the rivers. We built cities and monuments. And then we tired of it and left. Kimi is Kemet, by the way. But here's the key point. So what is then what's the connection between the Twa So these are the Twa. These are Kung people coming out of the Kalahari Desert, and these are the people who give birth to humanity. And these are the people who also the Kung are the first, and then you have the Twa coming out of the Congo. And according to mitochondrial DNA, they are the second oldest group of Twa. And these Twa are close to the place called the Mountain of the Moon, who are among the people who migrate along with the Kung into the Nile Valley. Now, according to Sheikh Anta Diop, the priest of Kemet, and many other authorities, Kemet's history goes back 10,000 BC. 10,000 BC. And so these are people who, by the way, are coming from the area where the oldest hominids are discovered, Lucy and that. Well, those are not human beings. Those are human ancestors, but part human in characteristic and part non-human. These are your first human beings. The first period in Kemet's history is this ancient period. And it's this ancient period that develops all the elements of Kemetic civilization other than pyramid building. And so what are they? Writing. They give birth to writing. Now, of course, in the stories, they say Tehuti, invented writing. Whether Tehuti did or not, it was, these ancient Kemites who did. They created the solar calendar that's so accurate, we use it to this day. The ancient Kemites did. They created a fully developed philosophy, which African philosophy is spirit-based. It's not like Western philosophy. They had a highly educated priesthood, the oldest of which is the priesthood of Ani, A-N-I, and we'll see who Ani was. They had one of the most advanced astrological and astronomical systems. The pyramids were also used as astronomical observatories located along usually the path of Orion or some other star. All of these elements and many more, the Egyptian book of the coming forth by day that's incorrectly called the Book of the Dead, that's Anu, So the elements of civilization, including the pharaonic system itself, is created in this ancient period. Now, what I want to do is, and I'm going to do this briefly, I want to use a method, and I'm only going to give one real detailed example here, but in other cases, when I have more time, I go into it in more detail. What I want to do is use what's called the precession of the equinoxes, which is a 26,000-year cycle. Are you familiar with this?
The great year? The great year is it called also?
Right.
Yes.
Are you familiar about how it occurs?
Yes.
This is one of the best measuring systems for history. I'm an astrologer, amateur astronomer. I'm not an astronomer, but I know enough astronomy to know the basic elements of this. The precessional cycle, this is basically what precession is. This is the Earth in its orbit around the sun, 365 days in a year. And so that's the Earth orbit around the sun. But precessional cycles, which are that have subcycles of 2,100 years, roughly 12 cycles of that, come close to 26,000 years. This is caused by the pull of the gravity of the sun and the moon on the earth. And what that gravitational pull does is try to move the earth straight up. Instead, it spins like a top, like here. So you see this top, it goes from side to side the way you do when you do a good dance, shake your booty, you know what I mean? And so what's happening here is that the Earth's position in relationship to the zodiac, and these are the zodiacal signs. This is the temple of Dendera in Kemet. And so the Earth's relationship to these zodiacal signs changes every 2,100 years or so. That has an effect on what goes on Earth. And all I can say is, I know a lot of people will have trouble with this. Oh, this is mumbo jumbo, and astrology don't mean anything. Well, the first thing to realize is the Kemites gave birth to astrology. According to Herodotus, the Kemites could tell by the time, date, year, and place of a person's birth the course of their life. He was told this by the priest. Astrology and astronomy were linked, just as physics and metaphysics were, But with the white boy, everything is materialized. So astronomy is a material science, but there's no application of how it applies to human beings. So in our case today, if we're dealing with precessional cycles, in the precession of the equinoxes, most political astronomers, I'm a political astrologers, who are into applying this to history, say, well, we're in a transition from Pisces to Aquarius, from an age that had been very religious to an age that is going to be involved in higher and confusing values, to an age that's going to be about revolution. And we're in a transition period. And if you look at the 20th century, you had the Russian Revolution, the Chinese Revolution, the Cuban Revolution, and other attempts at change. Black liberation movements that were called revolutions that were not, or Malcolm X that was a revolutionary. So in looking at precessional cycles, if we're looking at this period of 10,000 BC, the first precessional cycle is the precessional cycle of Leo in this 10,000 year period, which is around 9,000 BC. Now, the dynastic Kemites, when they looked at Great Sphinx, and by the way, Dr. Finch argues this Sphinx is a female. And if it is, that would be consistent with this Chwa stuff that is male-female balance, but has a strong female side, especially when you get to the agrarian period. And the people who are Anu, who found Kemet, are agrarian Chwa, the people who migrated into Kemet in the beginning, Stone Age, and then move into this period of agriculture. So this period of 9,500 BC of the precessional cycle, it is the precessional cycle of Leo that's symbolized by a lion. And it's symbolized by the qualities of that. Now, I'm an astrologer, and I can tell you I didn't believe in this stuff until somebody did my chart and told me more about me than my mother knew, you know? And so all I can say is that, is it a coincidence that at this period of the precessional cycle of Leo, you're building one of the greatest architectural monuments in the world, which has its nose shut off. They can clearly, it's a soul brother or sister, probably a soul sister, in the form of a lion with a human head, you know? Is it coincidence that at this very time, this is the precessional cycle of Leo? Because what tends to happen is across the world, when you go through precessional cycles, you'll see similar things happening in similar societies. You know, you have an age of kingship and queenship and everything else. And then you have an age that shifts from that. How is it that across the world that happens? So this is an environment, and you can call this a stellar environment, and people are not compelled to do anything. It's their choice. Most historians have noted these are watermarks that indicate that after the Sphinx was built, the Nile had flooded and had gone up to this level. So it precedes the flooding of the Nile, and dynastic Kemites only saw this as a sacred object. They did not know what it represented, but clearly it represents high level of civilization. Now, this is some of the stuff that's coming out of this ancient period. To my left, this is flint stuff. This flint stuff is both in the pre-agrarian period, the Stone Age, and it's also the agrarian period. And you can see up here, some of these are tips for bows, and then others for various work. What's interesting is, in my study of the archaeological finds during this period, there are hardly no weapons. Hardly no weapons. This is a peaceful society, which is the nature of the Twa who gave birth to them. Notice the natural comb. It's only one people that use that. And by the way, these are in ivory. What's that telling you? These are people who are into beauty. You understand? Beauty. And you're seeing the first carvings here, you know, here and here. Some of these barely have any design at all. And then these designs are very basic, you know, this pottery. This pottery throughout Africa plays a sacred role because these are used in spirit ceremonies. And of course, they carry grains and foodstuffs, but they play a especially sacred role. Now, I want you to note up here these four figures here. These four figures are African Venus figures, normally associated with the San or Kung people. The big butt woman. That woman here is a spirit person. She's sacred in these societies. And she's playing a big role in the founding of Kemet. These three figures here you can see are not African. And you have a few of those. And the bird figure on the top, I'll explain in a minute what that is symbolic of. So again, you see the pottery. You're seeing the early development of pottery. And then you're seeing what was happening in the Nile Valley, in this 9,500, 8,000, 7, 6,000, you had wild animals. By the time you get to dynastic Kemet, you didn't have any, you know. And these are all African animals. Look at them, you know. And then you're seeing the growth of agriculture. You want to say something?
Yes. Let me ask you a quick question. So, from the looks of this, this was obtained through some excavation work. Do you know where in the Nile Valley this pottery and these those bowls, the flint, and some of the Venus objects, where location was excavated from?
Yeah, it was all over Kemet, upper and lower Kemet. And this
Okay.
particular civilization had its presence all over Kemet. So you have here the map of Kemet, both upper and lower Kemet. They're found in both places. And some of the places they're found at is Ant, A-N-T, On, or what's called Hermothesis, Dendera, and On. And these are upper and lower Kemet. These are Anu cities. And you know they're Anu because they have the register of the Anu that we'll come to in a minute. So notice again the Venus figure. Here you've got the big woman, a sacred object, and here scarification, indicating initiation in secret societies. This is a highly evolved spirit person, you know. The only evidences that I found of any kind of weapons are these little pointed things right here. And again, the natural comb, which is found all over the place. And again, the pot. So what you're seeing here is evidence of people who have a sense of beauty, but that beauty, and by the way, you see the boat here, right? Which is giving you an idea, because what you see also in some of these finds, I don't know if I have them here, but you'll see the ancient Kemetic boats that are the same ones found in Kutsul, you know, 300 or 400 years before dynastic Kemet. Okay, that's it. Okay, so main thing I'm going to wrap up in a minute, is note that
I just want to say something quickly. Family, make sure you like and the video and subscribe and please share. Make sure we get this out. Make sure you also go to Dr. Obatoshaka's page and follow him on his platform. Again, make sure you like, comment, and share. Go ahead, Dr. Obatoshaka. Sorry about that.
Yeah, that's fine. I'll go back to processional cycles in a minute because I'll end with that. But when Sheikh Anta Diop and Theophile Obenga made their presentation in UNESCO, this was the most important piece of evidence they used to prove the Black origin of the pharaonic system right here. And this is extremely old, 4,000 or 5,000 BC. We don't know the exact date. And by the way, I had this done in this color, but this is actually in green. The actual rendering is in green. So while I was writing this book,
just 1 second. I just want to be for clarification purposes. When you say they use this, you talking about the image in front of the book?
They use what? What do you mean?
You said they use this to show the origins of ancient Kemet.
Yeah,
when you say this,
they use this particular drawing to prove that the Kemetic pharaonic system had a Black origin. Now, they used other evidence, but this was the most convincing evidence, because this is the key point that you find in this ancient period of Kemetic history. The only people who are associated with pharaonic rule are Africans. And the first ones you notice, these are Twa. See these little people? Huh? Now, I read Petrie, Flinders Petrie, who's supposed to be the authority on ancient Kemet. These digs that I showed you come from research he did, but his interpretations are all off. Basically, he's saying these people were not African. He's tracing them to Europe when Europeans didn't exist in any form, not at 9,500 BC. And so, though Sheikh Anta Diop used the translation of Petrie at the UNESCO conference, Obenga had hired him at state. And so I asked Obenga to translate this for me. I don't read Medu Neter. And so I use the experts, Jacob Carruthers, him, and others. So he translated this. So what did Petrie say this was? He said, this figure here, note his left foot is forward with the staff of authority. He said, this is Lord Terra Neter. Lord Terra Neter. Teranneter. Obenga correctly got that interpretation and noted it was wrong. No human being never had the name of Neter. So this is wrong. So when Obenga translated this, it read this Uo, U-O, who is a chief or head of a nome, has come to the palace, the temple of Hemin, to worship the god. This is the god. You see this figure with two ears? Do you know what that figure is right there?
With two ears.
See it up there? What figure does?
I think you're talking about this one right here.
Yeah, right. Up on facing him, you got this animal figure with two ears. Who do you think that's portraying?
Well, I can think of as Impu or Anubis.
No, Set.
Set. Okay.
The Anu Neter for Pharaoh was Set. It was not Horus. Horus is the Neter for the dynastic people, first dynasty. They're both African, but the dynastic people are bigger African. So what this Medu Neter reads is, this one here is a great one. The three registers that are vertical mean great one. That is the name for these people. I say the correct terminology for this period of ancient Kemet is not pre-dynastic. It is the founders of the dynasties, the first dynasties of Kemet, the great ones. It is the historical period of the great ones who found all of the elements of Kemetic civilization except for pyramid building. All of them. Do they deserve to be called great ones? Hell, they create the greatest classical civilization in humanity. These are the people who created it. And so this is saying he's come to the temple of Hemin. His left foot is forward. It means that he's of nobility. The staff of authority, which is a symbol for Medu Neter, God speaks, and Medu Nefer. And it means a wise one. You hear me? He has come to worship the God who is the Pharaoh, who in Kemet was this one. I argue this is the actual rendition of Asar. This is the way he looked. And the reason I argue that is that it was the habit of the ancient Kemites to preserve the image of their great priest and pharaohs in a temple in wooden carvings. This is a wooden carving. And if you look at it, this is not a general picture. This is a picture of a specific person. And look at those eyes, you know. Now, according to Herodotus, who was in Kemet after the period of Black rule, he was taken into one of the great temples of Kemet, where they kept carvings of the various priests and pharaohs, their images and their likenesses. And as Sheikh Anta Diop points out, Asar was a real person. His head was found in a jar in Abydos. This man was called the Black One. he was also called the Pure One, the same title as you have for the Kun. But all the Kun were pure. This one was, because you're entering a different phase of history now. This is not the period of unity where human beings are living in harmony with nature complete. They're trying, but this isn't the period where all the males and females are equally empowered to govern every phase of society. But they're drawing from that principle. And so Asar, I locate the likely period for Asar's rule as the processional cycle of Shu and Tefnut, which is in the processional cycle in the West would be called Gemini. Air and moisture, but it is a separation of earth from the air. It's twinness. It symbolizes a period of twinness. Asar is known as the keeper of the twin treasuries. This period of 5800 BC is a period where you have twin capitals, twin crowns. He wears the twin crowns of the white crown and the ram crown, meaning he ruled both upper and lower Kemet. And it was said of him that he was a person of peace. He, after, according to the sayings, he left Kemet for a while and civilized other parts of the world. But he was a person who civilized through humor, through music, through kindness, through wisdom. And so his name was also Ani, A-N-I. The term Anu comes from the term for Asar, Ani. The oldest priesthood in Kemet is the priesthood of Ani. So this is just a brief overlook. There's a whole lot more to this. So what we find then is these Anu people, these great ones, these little ones, improvised the civilization starting around 9,500 BC. And I think it's reasonable to conclude, because it took a while to get to a dynastic period where you could have pharaohs. You have people who are coming out of this Twa model of male-female empowerment that are innovating and creating Kemetic civilization. Now, one of the things we know about the pharaohs is that while Asar was married to his sister, they gave him royal right, since the right to rule came through the line of royal women. We also know there were numerous pharaohs, either before or after Asar, more likely after, if he's the first one, and all of the authorities say so, Kemetic authorities. There was a period, though, where women picked the pharaoh. You ever heard of that? And they were called Shepsut. Hatshepsut comes from the term Shepsut, who was among the farmers of Kemet, and they were female. And remember, the economy is agrarian. They picked one that interfaced with the pharaoh. And that one gave to the pharaoh the will of all these ladies who were the agriculturalists. But then there was a period where they actually picked the pharaohs themselves, and a number of them. And so that would be an indirect principle application of all the males and females being equally empowered. In this case, the females have got a say-so in the males who are serving as pharaoh.
And Dr. Obertalker, what period did that happen in?
Well, see, in the case of the Shu Tefnut period, that Shu Tefnut period that I just went through is a 5800 BC period, which I think is the period in which Asar rules, because there's other evidence associating Asar with Shu Tefnut. It would be in this processional cycle. So it's around 5800 BC, the Shu-Tefnut period. The key thing is this principle of male-female interaction and governance at the kingly-queenly level is an indirect application of all the males and females being equally empowered to govern every phase of society. In this case, you've got a male-female involvement in decision-making, which is found all over Africa, because that's the institution of kingship and queenship found among the Asante with the Asante Hina, Asante Wa. King can't sit unless the queen mother sits. And the queen mother nominates the king. And it's not her son. There's no relationship biologically between the two. And that would resemble what happened in this period of the great ones at one point, where women were picking the pharaoh. And generally, whoever was picked, because this one was the pure one, was the best man, meaning the most just, most kind, most brave, most honorable human being. That's the one you had to pick. And that's why dynastic Kemet, I don't care how much Ra or other gods who come up in the dynastic period, the root is always a Sar. And he is the one who then carries you to the life, death, rebirth, period of judgment and everything else, which is also important for African people, because eternity, eternal life is the most important thing. That's it. Any comments?
Wow. Oh, yeah. When I think of the Twa and Mbuti people, one of the things that come to mind when I think of the affection and the love that was displayed, the admiration that was displayed by such rulers like Pepi II in the Harkuf stories, the infamous Harkuf story, and how that was such a, and sometimes it's mistranslated in the sense of misinterpreted the intent there for Pepi desiring Harkuf to bring the Twa person to him in the capital, during his trade expeditions to Yam. And I wanted to know if you can just, I know we're getting kind of close on time here. We can maybe close out with this. If you can maybe elaborate on that.
Yeah, the Pharaoh said he wanted to see the little one who danced the dance of God and to preserve him and everything else, because he's going back to ancestral power. The source, they're mighty ancestors. So the dance of the gods, by the way, which is the ring shout. The counter,
Which is the what? Which is the what?
The ring shout.
Ring shout.
You haven't heard of the ring shout?
No.
Ring shout is a counterclockwise dance done by Africans in enslavement and all over Africa. Obenga describes the same dance where Africans in America would sing the spirituals to the ring shout with a shuffle. Their feet would never leave the ground. And so that dance, the Twa said, was for harmonizing heaven with earth. And as again, the Lakota holy man, Full Crow, said, God is a sucker for music. And it makes sense because music is a vibratory force. And of course, God, who is the greatest musician, greatest artist, greatest scientist, greatest everything, God would appreciate some music that a lot of us wouldn't. My wife is born in the UK, she's from Barbados, raised in Barbados, then 21 years in the US, then another 21 years in the UK where I met her on her 21st year. 21 is, by the way, a number in my destiny. So she has a tolerance for music that most blacks in this country wouldn't have, because she's all over the world listening to music. Her favorite music, by the way, is jazz. You know what I mean? Well, God has a tolerance well beyond that. And Pythagoras, who was initiated into the Kemetic mystery systems for 22 years, said that the rotation of all the planets emits a musical sound. It's just the frequency is too high for us to hear it. God's a great musician. By the way, George Washington Carver wasn't only a great scientist, he was a great painter, and he got a scholarship to go to one of the best painting schools in the country, art schools, and turned it down. He was also a musician and a singer. And he was such a good singer, he got a scholarship for one of the musical observatories. In other words, a musical scientist, an artistic scientist. You understand? That's what God is. That's what this man Asar was. You understand? That's what Black folks are when we're in harmony with ourselves. We're artistic people, creative people. That's our ethos, by the way, creativity. So natural to us, we take it for granted. That's, again, your Twa, Kemetic, African legacy, but it's our ethos. Kemet's ethos was Ma'at. Yoruba ethos is Ori, destiny. Ours is creativity because we had to be creative to survive and thrive as a people. Creativity is our whole card. So when you want to know when the Black person is down, when things look like you're going out, well, guess what? The one thing you can't predict about us is what we'll do. And when we go down inside ourselves and what Du Bois called going to the souls of Black folks, and we tap into the earliest time when happening first started happening, then we come up with something new, and it's always beautiful.
Always beautiful. Okay, family, we'll stop there on that note. We want to say thank you, Dr. Obitachaka, for coming. And it seems like there's so much more to share, and we would love to have you back to do a part 2 with this and continue this discussion, because I know this is just the very tip of it. And we would like to, see if we can follow this up with a more, a second or maybe even third addition to this first episode. So we look forward to that.
And I would encourage people, when they go to the Dr. Obitachaka show, in addition to subscribing, go and look at the series that I have on the Twa. It's about 5 parts. Go and look at the series I have on the Anu. It's about 4 parts. And then go look at the 2 shows that I did on the ancient Anu and their founding of Kemetic civilization. And that's where you get the real depth. My shows are chapters in a book. Louis Armstrong was born on August the 4th. He regarded his music as chapters in a book with an introduction, a middle, and an end. And that's because of our solar alignment, August the 4th. And so I'm not copying him. That's the way it goes for me. It's a chapter in a book. A lot of these shows are going to be put into books, by the way, because I've done a lot of research for each one. So check them out. And I enjoy you all. I encourage my viewers to watch HAPI. What I like about HAPI is your grounding in our history and culture, but both of you are a good team of 2 good people. That's what I like both. For me, I always look at characters first. Everything else is second. So good people, and I enjoy being with you.
And we like it speaking with you and being with you, and we enjoy your company and your character as well. And again, so we have to kind of figure out where we can come back and do this again. Do this again soon. All right.
Okay.
All right. So if you can just hang out a little bit backstage, we'll close out the show and we'll be right there. All right. All right. So once again, family, please like, comment, and share in the video. We got to get it out to as many people as we possibly can. We understand this information is very vital when it comes to reclaiming our history and our legacy. Please go to the website and support the program, support the channel, support the HAPI movement. You can get the Hapifilm, the HAPI merchandise, the HAPI newsletter, be a part of the HAPI movement. For those that missed the Happy Day of Black Excellence, there will be something in the future. When we don't have that information right now, but just stay tuned. And the way you stay tuned is by being connected. You can also follow us on all our major social media platforms: YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram, or Hapifilm. Again, like, comment, and share. And also love donations, love offerings are also very, they're honored and welcome. The Cash App is always available for people just to come and show their support and show their happy love through the Cash App. Again, family, thank you for joining us tonight. Well, and we look forward to seeing you again soon. Peace.
I don't know what we can talk about in this nation without talking about white superiority. Honestly,
Who defines the meaning of God also defines the relationship between economy and God.
African Americans spent $1.3 trillion last year, making us the 16th wealthiest nation in the world. Why have we not turned those riches into wealth to develop our community?